Paddy and the Tornado. That's our story from a COVID-inspired story that we came up with and presented in the Zoom session last week, the last 2 weeks actually. And we've been looking at some of the teachings around that and finding our details, and we've been opening up space and harvesting a lot of the goodies, the treasures. As you know, stories have a way of transforming our lives if we allow them. Subtle, maybe not as direct as some other ways, but stories have a way of opening up parts of ourselves that have been neglected. As we say in Ireland, beauty loves neglected places. And so we have these darker patches in our quilt that sometimes stories can throw a light on, and for us to be able to then take responsibility for that. And so it's like a dream, or like watching a good movie. You get inspired sometimes to look under your own hood and do a little bit of work. So Paddy and the Tornado was the story, and you'll see in this newsletter the link below, but it also ended up that we wandered into the territory of beauty, because the story really is about a deeper kind of beauty, and one that I'm going to call a village intelligence. We're seeing this in the COVID times right now, where we're seeing people doing all sorts of incredible gestures for the village. A buddy of mine, Dave, who runs Ubuntu Cafe, he's transformed his cafe into providing meals for the village. Those who can afford it pay for it, those who can't. He's been working with the government to keep his staff on a living wage. He's been upgrading his business, reimagining his business so that it can serve more of the community. And he's also been asking the staff to help out with, the creativity around that, and how do we serve the community in COVID times. We're seeing debts from 200 years ago, well, maybe 150 years ago, when there was an Irish famine, potato famine. There was lots of people dying. There was a nation in the United States that sent some money. They raised a bunch of money, and it was maybe the equivalent of $500 in today's money, but now the Irish government is repaying that. We're seeing, of course, nature restore itself, and we're seeing nature and culture. We're seeing this village intelligence being this expression of our more true human beingness, the beauty of who we really are starting to come together and be expressed more genuinely. I've seen so many smiles on my way to my office when I'm riding my bike. I can't remember where I've got a disgruntled look anymore. Probably have seen them in the last little while, but not a lot. But so that's a certain kind of beauty, a way of saying that village intelligence, that sharing, that true human being that's coming out and looking after each other and trying to come up with different ways of connecting and staying warm and staying in our authentic self. That's one kind of beauty. We know there's other kinds of beauty, things on the outside, whether it be our looks or whether it be our clothes or whether it be other things, or it could be the flowers, it could be the roses or the allium, the lilies, the beautiful lilacs, and of course the smell of those things, the lilacs in particular. I mean, that's another form of beauty, where beauty is in the eyes of the beholder, or in the nose of the beholder, or in the sounds of the beholder, right? We can see, beautiful things when people have their masks on and then they take them off and say, hi. There's a beauty in that, right? But we can see that, we have a certain attachment to looking a certain way, depending on our culture, depending on where we are in the world. Within that continuum of beauty in the eyes of the beholder, there's also kind of the unsavory kinds of beauty, which is, the terror that happens in life, and the car accidents, the cancers, and then, of course, there is beneath that the collateral beauty, and being able to see that. Within that, there's also the beauty of one of my buddy, death. Not a morbid thing at all. Death is all about teaching us about aliveness, and we've squirreled death away, haven't we? And we now need to bring it back because it is the greatest teacher. And every night we die and go into our dreamland, which is that dark matter. We go back into our 97% dark matter and hang out with this guy or this woman or guy and woman and learn internally about all of that. And of course, our dreams come out and express that in different ways. There's beauty in all sorts of different kinds of nature. We've seen that, and some of us are drawn to rocks like I am. I'm more of a mineral guy. In Africa, that's the storyteller, the one that remembers history and the one that connects with things that are solid and real. So there's beauty in the eyes of the beholder. Sorry, moving around this camera. And there's the shallow end of that, and the beautiful things that we like to see, the beautiful flowers. But then there's the deep end of that, which is kind of the ugly stuff, the unsavory stuff, the things that we don't like to really say out loud. But I want to talk to you also about a third kind of beauty, right? There's the village intelligence beauty. That's a very high quotient. We're seeing that beauty coming out, that true human being starting to share. And we're all going to work together somehow to reimagine our world. So there's that kind of beauty. There is the beauty in the eyes of the beholder. There's a deeper continuum. There's a deeper continuum of that. But then there's this third kind of beauty, which is purpose-driven beauty. When somebody's on task, when somebody is living into their fullness of their purpose, their meaning, their vitality, and they're dialed in with their gifts and whatnot. So a beautiful story. Some of you have heard me tell this story. It's a great story, like mine, very much like mine, but maybe a bit different. So Paddy comes to me and says, well, I guess you want to talk about the problem. He comes into my private practice and sits down, and he's spends most of his time in the psych ward, and he gets out on the weekend to go and visit family and spend a night with his mom and dad, have some home-cooked meals. But he's been there 7 or 8 years, and Paddy is a challenge with all sorts of diseases and all sorts of mental health issues, and he's pretty problem saturated for sure, and comes to me and says, well, hi, I guess you want to talk about the problem. And I said, well, how about you tell me if that's been useful. You've seen all sorts of people in the world, you're on all sorts of medication, you're living in a psych ward, you're occasionally out, you're on all sorts of your life is very restricted. And so has it been useful seeing all sorts of other people and talking about the problem? Doctors, psychiatrists, healers, all sorts of alternative, integrative people. And he said, actually, that's not been useful. I said, so how about we don't talk about the problem? How about we talk about something you're interested in? And he goes, well, there's only one thing I've ever really been interested in, and that is the history of architecture. So we spent, of course, the next 6 months talking about the history of architecture. We talked a little bit about the problem. Insurance was paying for my services. Don't say anything out loud. And we talked mostly not about the problem. But in 6 months of not talking about the problem, but talking about his beauty, which was his, history of architecture, he's on half the med, well, two-thirds less meds. He's enrolled to do his master's program. He's playing hockey. He's chasing women. He's going on dates. He's living in his parents' basement. You get the picture. But he says to me, shouldn't we be really talking about the problem? And I said, well, it's up to you. Let's look at your metrics. And I said, so should we talk about the problem? And he said, no, let's not talk about the problem. So 2 years went by. He's out in the world. He's sharing his beauty with the world. So those are the 3 kinds of beauty I wanted to talk about in this newsletter. I hope that's useful. We have village beauty. We have beauty in the eyes of the beholder and the deep end of that. And then we have being on purpose beauty. And that's my mentorship program right Talk to you soon.